Satoshi Kon, very significant in this kind of movement of film that I have deemed, I've given it a title myself. I called the Millennium Mind era of filmmaking.
Yeah.
You know, there's this era of filmmaking around that turn of the millennium or leading up to it or dealing with it, rationalizing with it, that I think lives in a lot of like modern surrealism. I think he is maybe the most significant voice for me now looking back, analyzing it, thinking about it, talking about it in that kind of surrealistic movement of cinema.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on? We are the podcast where we try and throw open the gates to anime, whether you're a new fan, a returning fan, or a veteran. Ever wanted to get into anime but didn't know where to start? We're the podcast for you. But if you are one of those grizzled veterans, we'll accommodate you as well. We're doing a lot of things here at Gateway. Anyway, today we have a very special guest. We have a mate of mine, someone I work with, and we, do a bit of chatting around the office, and we both share a very serious love for one of the great anime directors of them all, and that is Satoshi Kon. But let me introduce Alexei Toliopoulos, who is a comedian, podcaster, actor, and I would say the film guy in this country, if I do dare say so myself.
Finally, it's on the record.
It's on the record.
Finally, I've been deemed the film guy.
The film man.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Alexei Toliopoulos. I am a film expert. I love film. I'm really excited to be here. If you want to know who I am, I make podcasts often about film, and I really like making kind of documentaries and stuff. So I've made documentary series, Finding Drago, Finding Desperado, their podcast. Finding Jesus is a YouTube series, so click the links over to watch that next. But also, I'm making a podcast series at the moment called Sunburnt Screens, the Australian Cinema Odyssey, and it's an exploration of Australian cinema. I'm using it as like an introduction point to introduce people to what I care about most, which is Australian film, and hopefully inspire you to like take your own journey through Australian film. And basically, I'm talking to a lot of the filmmakers I grew up admiring my whole life. So it's a dream passion project of mine. I don't know why I said that like a little baby. Just
because you're excited.
Yeah, I'm excited about
it's good to be excited,
I love
mate.
talking about movies. It's my favorite thing in the world. And we're going to be doing a lot of that today.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with Satoshi Kon, he was a visionary director, made 4 films and a TV series, was making a 5th before his very tragic demise. But the major theme for Satoshi Kon is the mixture of fiction and reality. Basically, he is all about that intersection between reality and fiction and whether or not those two things can be real or not real, the liminal space in which reality and our perception of reality comes into being. So he was an avant-garde in many ways filmmaker, a real visionary, someone who was pushing the boundaries of animation, and also one of the first people to really make adult-themed anime popular in the West. It had been done so quite a bit. Obviously, of course, 2 of his mentors in Oshi and Otomo with Akira and Ghost in the Shell, whom he worked with very early on in his career, were doing these things. But I think they were still cyberpunk and very sort of genre films. He was doing something very interpersonal, which hadn't been seen before, especially in the West. So he was a very unique filmmaker in respect to the fact that he could just tell human stories. His 1-minute story, which he made, called Hayo, which is on YouTube. You can go watch it. It is a beautiful, we watched it before we even started
We
this.
whipped out my phone. We all cradled around my phone to watch it. It's 1 minute long, and I think it's actually a perfect encapsulation of everything that he does.
Yes. Check it out, Satoshi Kon Hayo on YouTube. That will give you a great little look into what he is and what he does and why he is so revered and how much Hollywood owes him for what he did. I mean, Inception wouldn't exist. Black Swan wouldn't exist. So many things wouldn't exist. He is just someone so special, and it's really exciting to talk about him. So we'll dive deep into his films now and a little bit more backstory as we go along. But let's get into who and what Satoshi Kon did and why his films are so important. Thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure to be here. And excited to talk about one of the great artists, I think, of the millennium era of filmmaking. I think that Satoshi Kon, very significant in this kind of movement of film that I have deemed, I've given it a title myself. I call the Millennium Mindfuck era of filmmaking.
Yes.
You can bleep me if you need to, censor me if you must.
Oh, we never would.
But, there's this era of filmmaking around that turn of the millennium or leading up to it or dealing with it, rationalizing with it, that I think lives in a lot of like modern surrealism. I think Satoshi Kon is like maybe the epitome of all of that.
Yes.
And I'm talking about stuff like, Truman Show, I think is definitely in that area. The Matrix, obviously. But even like, even talking about Matrix, a lot of films that I think they're progeny, they're inspired by anime. So I think there's something about that. They have like this interesting like surrealism that I think a lot of like modern surrealism, I think even begins in anime. And so I think he is maybe the most significant voice for me now looking back, analyzing it, thinking about it, talking about it in that kind of surrealistic movement of cinema.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just such an extraordinary body of work. And Charlie, I mean, we've obviously all just gone back and watched this. And when was the first time you actually watched Satoshi Kon?
Look, I think the first one I actually watched was Paprika when I was in high school. And I think it went entirely over my head. And I was in a phase in high school where if I didn't understand something, I would just be like, well, that's overrated. Like that was my favorite word, pretentious, overrated, that kind of thing. Looking back, so wrong. Oh my gosh, that is a fantastic movie. But also I have since then learnt my lessons and have watched a bit of Satoshi Kon. We have talked about it a bit. One thing I learned, and we'll get into it as we kind of break down his films, is I just got so much more out of it. And I think it's something that is, particularly with Perfect Blue, I think you could just say that it predicted the internet and fan culture better than most things did.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of his works have that kind of, eerily accurate predictions and unfortunately bleak. Like I was kind of thinking to myself, I'm actually upset that this film has aged as well as it has. It's like, unfortunately, it kind of predicted the way of certain things, particularly when it comes to feminism, fan cultures, celebrity, dealing with your creative self. There's so much in his films and I'm so excited to talk about all of them.
So for those of you who don't know, Satoshi Kon was born in 1963, and I guess part of the reason why he's such a legend is that he died very prematurely. He died at the age of 46. In 2010, he was diagnosed in May with pancreatic cancer, and he was dead by August. It was instant. 46 years old, we lost one of the great visionaries. I'm convinced he would have won an Oscar. I'm actually pretty salty he was never nominated during his short life. But he was, of course, a film director, animator, screenwriter, and manga artist from Sapporo, up in Hokkaido. So best known for the 4 films that we will talk about, which of course, Perfect Blue, Millenium Actress, Tokyo Godfathers, and Paprika, and a television series, a mini-series called Paranoia Agent. Now, we've talked about Perfect Blue on this podcast before, and I have talked about Satoshi Kon before, but not enough. So we're really going to dig deep into this. Now, he's worked with some of the most extraordinary people. So he won a competition when he was in college, just a runner-up in a manga competition, which then got him basically sort of semi into the field. But he ended up working with Otomo, who of course made Akira. He became his like protege in many ways. He also co-wrote a manga with the creator of Ghost in the Shell. So he was working with the big fellas pretty much instantly. Very, very fast. So he got into this very, very young. And then from there, started doing a lot of stuff for Otomo, like coming up the ranks. He did do the manga with the creator of Ghost in the Shell, but had creative differences and therefore left the project and never went back to manga again. He's like, I'm done with this. I want to make film. So that's sort of, I can dive deeper into that, but I think that's sort of, we don't need to do that. You can go back and listen to our anime movies episode where I sort of went a bit deeper into his past, but we're here to talk about the films. So his first film, which we'll start with, is my favorite of his films personally, and that is, of course, Perfect Blue, 1997. Alexei, would you like to tell everyone about Perfect Blue?
It's kind of hard to categorize Perfect Blue. It's 1997. It is one of the early films where we start thinking about the internet, where we are trying to analyze what it is and express what it is. And that's what I kind of think about when I think about this era of surrealist filmmaking and what kind of modern surrealism is, especially when it's translated through film, which is taking a concept that's kind of abstract, like the internet at that time. It's quite an abstract concept because it's a whole new way of communication. And then finding a way to not just visually express what it is, but to kind of find a form to it or literalizing it. And I think with Perfect Blue, what it does is it takes the internet, at times it turns it into a physical space, and then at times it turns it into a poetic, metaphysical space or like a philosophical space as well. But what it basically is, it's a story about a pop star who is leaving pop stardom in an attempt to become an actress and to become a serious actress is kind of more what I would say, rather than just like, you know, a hack or a fluffy actor, to take art seriously in that extent. But beyond that, it is about the fandom around her and the fandom that these kind of pop sensations have, and how there's like a twist to it, the darkness aspect of that, like the stalker aspect of that. And what I find so fascinating about it, and you touched on it before, Charlie, was that it's like unfathomable what a prophetic vision this is. Because I would have seen this movie for the first time maybe 5 years ago. I remember I saw Paprika, almost exact same story as you. I saw it in high school. It was one of the first Blu-rays that the video store I worked at owned, because it was like an early Blu-ray release. I have that version. When the store closed down, that was one of the, God, I'll be honest, like hundreds. I took like 100 movies. So it's not just like, oh, wow, like it was special to me. It's like, no, I took heaps of them. But what shows that special, it's one of the few that I still retain in my collection. So yeah, it is important to me. But I remember seeing it around then because I did see it before Inception came out, because Inception is 2010, right? Mm-hmm. So it came out before that because I was still working at the store. 2006. So I would have probably seen it in 2008, 2009, maybe 2010. I'm trying to think when Blu-rays came out, 2010. This is, for me, the most exciting part of the podcast. For everyone else, the specifics of when a Blu-ray came out would be mind-dumping. But for me, I'm delighting in trying to figure out the mathematics of this. But I would have seen that, and I definitely would have seen Tokyo Godfathers. Is that before or after? Before. I think I would have seen that before this film, but I never registered same person for me. It wasn't until a few years later, a friend of mine introduced me to Paranoia Agent. And I was like, whoa, I got to get back into it. So I saw Perfect Blue for the first time. I was very impressed by it. But now going back to it again, you know, the language didn't even exist for it. Like, people didn't use terms like parasocial relationships and stuff when this was coming out. And you see it now and go, this is prophetic vision of the future, prophetic vision of what the internet will be, the prophetic vision of how relationships form around and through the internet, how we communicate, the dark side of all of that stuff. I do truly believe that it's an area that I'm interested in, is films about the internet. As far as like dramatic films, fictional films, narrative films about the internet go, there's nothing that holds a candle to this. I think it is proper masterpiece. Going back to it again, I think it's his best film. It's hard to say. He's made a lot of great films, and I don't always like to say a debut film is a director's best work. I feel guilty when I say that. But there's something about this where it's a very pure vision of something that is yet to happen. Like, he is Nostradamusing this shit. It's crazy. It's unbelievable. And I was weeping watching it again. Like, I found it so emotionally effective and so powerful. And I think what he does with his surrealism, it's really interesting. But what really captured me this time, I don't talk about animation so much, so maybe my terminology is a little bit off, but the editing of the animation, like shot selection and reverse shot of everything, the way that he plays in that field is just fascinating, because it takes techniques from like live action films and does them in a way that can never be done in live action. And I find that his shot selection, his shot progress, the montage editing of his films, wow. There's no one that does it like him. No. And I'm sure we'll get deeper into that as we go through.
And that chase sequence at the end is one of my favorite chase sequences in any piece of media that I've ever seen. It's so extraordinary. And obviously the big theme with Satoshi Kon across all of his work is the blending of reality and fiction and that kind of liminal space which you can operate in between the two and how much they kind of meld in and out of each other and like what is reality. And then especially, I mean, I'm jumping here, but like with Paprika, of course, mental illness and those who are living in a state of altered reality, a constant theme in his work and massively in Perfect Blue.
I think, and it starts in Perfect Blue and it really is highlighted in Paprika. But one thing that kind of stuck out to me in this rewatch of all the films I was doing was I kind of went, there's a lot about, you know, obviously the dream reality, what's that, surrealism. But I think it's about confronting yourself and confronting your creative self a lot as well.
Yes.
Particularly with the protagonist of Perfect Blue, who you have is a pop idol, who then kind of she has no real choice here. She just gets told she's going to become an actor, even though she clearly, creatively prefers to be a singer. That's kind of her navigating that. And then you have all the way through Paprika with someone, and Paprika's interesting because I was like, this is such a love letter to film. You know, like you have
But so many
this
of his films
detective, absolutely, and you have this kind of idea of him literally like chasing himself and like facing your fears of doing what you want to do creatively, which is something that I had never noted in his films really as a through line before.
Yes.
Perfect Blue is a really uncomfortable watch. Anyone who hasn't seen it, there's a lot of content warnings on this one. Like,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
it's probably one of the scariest movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It genuinely terrifies me. The visuals of the stalker, everything, what she's going through, a lot of harrowing experiences. Often in film, I'll find gratuitous kind of assault scenes to be lazy and not something that I will gravitate towards. But I do think that in this film, it earns it.
There's something about this where in a lot of live action films that deal with like, sexual assaults, a lot of the time, especially when from male perspective or male filmmaker perspective, there can often be an exploitive element that is in the realm of like some kind of titillation or whatever. But I feel like there's he's able to sensitively capture the trauma of those experiences. I think is very rare for a male filmmaker to be able to do, like very earnestly. And that's what stood out to me more on this rewatch. Was like, oh, this is like so harrowing, these scenes.
And in being like prophetic and talking about that, I think that the conversations about her in the film, it's framed that she's filming a rape scene as an actor, and it's kind of like this idea that you're going to do what you're going to do, be taken seriously as an actress. As someone who used to be an actor, this stuff it definitely back in the day and even now up until recently is something that you kind of are expected just to shut up and do the scene because you want to be a professional. And I think that this conversation, showing that scene as awful as it is, I think is actually bringing out conversations that are far ahead of this film's times, which are now we have, intimacy coordinators, that kind of thing, and people who are now in place to kind of make actors feel safer. And this is a film that's critiquing that long, long before any of that was even relevant in Hollywood.
Like,
so that's
literally
actually
decades.
So that was interesting to me as well. This movie is it's beautiful to look at, and it's so, I mean, honestly, I feel like his soundtracks as well are always fantastic.
Soundtracks are just out of control. Well, interesting when he's talk about the soundtrack as well, because he had many influences. Of course, Akira Kurosawa, Terry Gilliam, one of his major.
absolutely.
Brazil was one of his favorite films.
Yes.
I would say you can see his editing through Brazil. Like you can see the Brazil style of editing is very much what informs his sense of editing, his pacing.
Yes.
He's able to elevate it, but also just like literally the way I would describe it is like montage, like what shots happen in what order and how you go from one scene to the next is very Terry Gilliam. And I think when we get into Millenium Actress is where where it's most at play.
Because his favorite films actually were Slaughterhouse 5.
Oh, that's so apparent. That's so apparent. Yeah.
The City of Lost Children. Then obviously Time Bandits, Brazil, The Adventures of Baron
von Munchausen.
Yeah. So those are his favorite films.
Wow, almost all Terry Gilliam movies apart from a couple.
Yeah.
Who directed the Slaughterhouse 5 movie?
That is a good question. It was 72.
George Roy Hill. It makes a lot of sense to hear that. Because that film it does something that his films do, especially Millenium Actress, where you will be in one scene. And if you're not familiar with Slaughterhouse 5, it's based on a book by... I can't remember his name.
Kurt Vonnegut.
Kurt Vonnegut, thank you. Yeah. It's based on a book by Kurt Vonnegut where it is about someone who's unstuck in time and they kind of slip through different times. In Slaughterhouse 5, the film adaptation of it is not well known, especially not as well known as the book, but the film does really interesting ways to kind of express those, where you'll be seeing the lead character in one scene, and then there'll be like a gesture or something that would lead to a cut. And traditionally, you would say it's happening in this scene, I would look to you, and the camera would cut to you. And that would be the normal way of telling it. Say that, he will look to this, but then it will be an entire new, the next cut, the next shot that you'll see will be a new environment or something that happened in the past or something that is yet to happen. But he will cut through different environments, different places, different times. And that's exactly what Satoshi Kon does, like throughout his films.
So I remember reading about how he landed this film, because this is his first, obviously, directorial debut.
Yes.
And it's through a JoJo's OVA, right?
Correct.
Which is
Yes.
interesting to get from a JoJo's OVA to Perfect Blue is wild.
Well, it was seen by Maruyama, who was obviously at that point the head of Madhouse.
Yeah.
And Madhouse produced all of his films. And it was obviously on the back of his work with Oshi, Ghost in the Shell, and obviously with Otomo. They, I think, suggested him. But yeah, basically they showed Maruyama at Madhouse was shown that episode of JoJo's and was like, this guy's amazing. Let's get him in here. And then I think Otomo was like, you need to get him in.
And Perfect Blue was meant to also be a OVA as well.
It was, yeah.
And it's an adaptation of a novel, but
is.
the novel is quite different. And
He changed a lot of it.
yes, so Satoshi Kon only agreed to do it if he could add elements, including like the idea of having a, as he said, play within a play. So you know how we have like the sequences of we don't know whether this is real or not, or like the idea of the
time.
acting and the cuts and everything. So it's amazing the author just went, yeah, sure, I did what you want.
Go nuts, man.
But then we
Yeah.
ended up with this incredible piece, which I think adds so much to it. So I found that interesting in terms of history of how this film came to be. And at the time, OVAs were kind of an answer to, if you're going to adapt something for animation, it was long form series usually.
Yes.
So if you're going to do something for animation, you either did that or an OVA. So to have this as a feature film and to do so well in international film festivals was kind of like a bit of a like turning point for art house psychological thrillers for animation. So more anime in general.
I mean, the fact that he got him up he was pretty young at this point, and I mean, he had some runs on the board, but not really to have been in the position he was in. But obviously, people realized his talent quite early.
I watched Magnetic Rose, which was an OVA which he wrote, and the director, who was one of the directors on Akira and the Animatrix,
Was Otomo,
So it was it's interesting to see some of the ideas. Obviously, very different animation style.
It's a compilation, right? Part of a compilation.
Yes, so there's 3, and this is one of the
the
stories.
first
So it's
one,
like a 40-minute. Check it out. It's actually really fantastic. It has so many of these ideas. Obviously, classic plays between dreams and reality, and follows characters trying to kind of discover themselves and finding themselves suddenly as other people and being confused as to who they are, and a lot of chase sequences, a lot of wonderful Satoshi Kon stuff, and a lot to like there. It's just a 40-minute watch, so highly recommend that if you're interested to see kind of some of his early work. As I said, written, not directed, but interesting.
Yeah, but funnily enough, all these influences are massive on him. Of course, Haruki Murakami as well, and Philip K. Dick, Osamu Tezuka, the godfather of anime. Of course, he was a huge Astro Boy fan.
Yeah.
But his greatest influence was a musician called Susumu Hirosawa. And Susumu Hirosawa was massive for doing fractal control. That was the big kind of thing. He was a very experimental. He actually did the original music for Berserk.
Oh wow!
In 1997.
Which is the best.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's
wow.
him. That's Hirosawa. He also did Millenium Actress, and at Satoshi Kon's funeral, the theme of Millenium Actress, written by Hirosawa, played. That was his funeral song. And I was going back and listening to a bunch of Hirosawa and reading. I almost got into a lecture. We're doing a Hirosawa podcast. I was like, this guy's wild, man. Like, he used to do, again, all of his concerts. He had like so many different bands, and eventually had a solo performance where he was an engineer initially, an electrical engineer. Well, not quite, but he had studied a lot of it in electronics, and then sort of became an engineer and a musician. So he's built all of these crazy machines. So he used to be in bands, and then towards the later part of his career, he just performs by himself, standing behind these machines that have these like green lasers with like kind of theremins, where he just puts his hand up and like triggers everything through the lasers, and then sings with like a head mic on, and it's like I watched him do the Millenium Actress theme live. It's extraordinary.
So you sure you went to sort of Marrickville rave, like in a warehouse? It kind of sounds like it.
Basically, right.
Did he also do the theme to Paranoia Agent?
He did.
Okay, yeah, that's just song I listen to a lot.
Yeah.
I love that. It's buoyant to me. It's exciting.
It's incredible. So yeah, and he did a lot every one of his albums and live tracks used to have full audiovisual accompaniments.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where Satoshi Kon got the kind of fractal, ideas from. And that was actually his greatest influence.
Before we move on from Perfect Blue, because we can
Yes.
talk about it forever, I just want to say we can't have a podcast about Satoshi Kon and Perfect Blue without bringing up very obvious Hollywood
Yes.
connections that we have here, obviously.
And this might be a recurring theme throughout the podcast episodes.
And it's one of those ones I think people, if you've ever watched any comparisons, you obviously know that Darren Aronofsky is a director who has largely borrowed, particular actual direct shots, which I believe he did. There's a shot of her in the bathtub from the bird's eye view that is in Requiem for a Dream.
It's exactly the same.
It's exactly the same, but he actually went about that the right way, apparently, to buy the shot and to kind of but he also, Black Swan is obviously the film that has a lot of themes, a lot of similarities. Obviously, you have Black Swan featuring a dancer as opposed to an actress, but there's a lot of things, the train scene, so many very clear references. And I believe that Darren Aronofsky and Satoshi Kon were actually quite close.
Aronofsky wrote a eulogy type thing for him in a magazine publication for his obituary.
But he's never admitted, he kind of claims that Black Swan was not influenced by Perfect Blue.
Come on, bro.
And it's like, you own the rights to this. Like,
He knows
what?
the movie. But it's interesting because I think there is a relationship to them, but I also think that there's other influences to Black Swan as well. Like,
Absolutely.
always think of like Suspiria when I watch it or something.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a very interesting relationship that they have because I don't know were they close? Because I know that they'd met a few times, or they
Not
talked.
close. I think Aronofsky idolized him.
That's very
Absolutely. But they did
Yeah.
meet a few times. And I think they were like, they were pretty cool. But but Aronofsky obviously just like loves Satoshi, which I think why Aronofsky makes such cool films. Like what an interesting influence to have in Hollywood at that time.
His films become more dreamlike. Like, they've always had this sense of surrealism. Like, I think Requiem for a Dream, and I always say that like it rhymes for some reason. I don't know why. That has an interesting use of surrealism to create a greater sense of pain or suffering,
dread,
or to something go beyond reality, like something that's even more real than real almost. And then, but then Mother's a nightmare. Like it feels like you're living in a nightmare. I don't like that movie very much, but I think it's interesting. I'd like to hear him go more on the record about their relationship or friendship. Just want to hear him talk about him because he has a reverence for him. It'd be so delightful to just hear him, gush.
Yeah, and Guillermo del Toro also wrote
wow.
an obituary as well, and heavily influenced by Satoshi Kon as well, of course. But we should probably move on to those. I mean, I could do Perfect Blue for another hour, but we should.
To me, that was the revelatory rewatch of this.
Yeah, right.
It really, really impacted me. I was impressed with it on every single level, more so than last time. True masterpiece. I would hold it in very, very high regard for the rest of my life. I'll proselytize it.
Yeah, it really stays with you, that one. It really does. It's truly brilliant.
You have to scream in the bath to wash it off. It's the only way.
That's the only way forward. But then the next film, which is probably even more dreamlike but much less sinister, is of course Millenium Actress. Now, I really like Millenium Actress. I think it's a really interesting concept. And I mean, do you want to talk about it? Give a little spiel?
It's a really interesting film. I think that it is. I'm so interested that the Slaughterhouse 5 comparison, because I think that these are symbiotic films. I think that a lot of the techniques he learns from the Slaughterhouse 5 film, because it's also a slipping through time. But what he does so interesting in this one, it's a slipping through time, but you have that revelation of it's like an Alzheimer's or a dementia that causes someone to be unstuck in time in a really philosophical sense, or a really psychological sense, rather. Like it's the reality as they experience it.
Yes.
And I found that to be very, very moving this time, to actually understand that. So it's basically a film about this actress who is now older, and a documentary crew from a studio that's closing down where she made a lot of her work go to meet her to make a documentary about her, basically. And the film kind of shifts, you never really see too much of like the verite style of the documentary. You're not really like, the film's not presented to you as a documentary at all. It's the way that you're hearing the story. Like, I think if this was audio and not visual, you would picture it to be a documentary. But you kind of like have this, it's a really beautiful way for it to become like a character study, to experience the world through her perspective, through her narration. I really like this. I love all his movies, but this one very much, it moved me a lot.
The main actress, was actually based off Setsuko Hara, who became a massive recluse after Yoshijiro Ozu's Tokyo Story.
Great movie.
Yeah, what amazing film.
Yeah.
She was the lead in that and then really withdrew. And that's who I believe she's based on. Yeah, just the blending but also, I mean, fact and reality, of course, the outside of it, but through film. And again, we mentioned it before, like Paprika, love letter to film in a weird way, so Perfect Blue, but like this is a love letter to film.
Overtly so.
And how much of an impact it has, not only on our lives, but our memories of ourselves, which you can kind of, amazing, like music's obviously the big one, where you look back at a certain time period when you hear a song, right? Like, oh, the summer of 2004, that song is that to me. Film and TV does that too, I think, in many, many ways. You go back to the time where you watched that thing. In the same way that memory works, where like when you have a memory of something, you're actually remembering the last time you had that memory. It's a weird kind of psychological fucking thing. But it's so powerful. And his love of film is so obvious and infectious, and he does it through beauty and horror and terror and confusion. It's such an interesting way that he expresses his love for the medium.
And I think I was reading some stuff about how this film was made, and it was meant to be, apparently Paprika was meant to be his next adapted film. And then he started production on that, and then the production company shut down. So then I think having this one set with a film company that is also shutting down is something that I guess is kind of a bit of a nod to like his own experience working in film, and that kind of, you know, because you don't really watch it and go like, this is, you know, autobiographical for Satoshi Kon because they're so, you know, kind of surreal in their setting, but it's kind of interesting to see like bits of his career that kind of appear.
I think so. Like it's interesting to see like the way that life can be interpreted then through animation. Like I find that really interesting because with film we just go, oh, it's a 1-2, you know, you can understand it, but then it's like about the construct. How do I present it? How far from reality can it be? How much of an abstraction can it be? I think he's just like a very elegant example of that. And I think this film in particular is very much like a thoughtful experience in that kind of way.
Yeah, it really is. And I've got a quote from I found in a Guardian article, which was written at the time of his death. And it says, "The human brain is mysterious. We can't share the time axis in our memory with other people. I'm interested in trying to visualize those non-linear ways of thinking." And I think that's just a really great quote for this film in particular. But I mean, all of his films. Millenium Actress is like, it's much more, probably, I mean, along with Tokyo Godfathers, the most sentimental and the most kind of, I don't know if heartfelt's the right word, but I suppose heartfelt. Like it's...
There's a warmth to these films. But it's not, it's an atypical warmth. It's an atypical warmth.
Yes.
The warmth is almost in the memory of feeling those emotions yourself.
Yes.
It's how I would kind of
100%.
try to describe it. Because, you know, there's some comfort in feeling melancholy. There's some comfort in feeling sadness or feeling loss, in going, especially when you're reading an artistic interpretation of it, you go, oh, other people have felt these too.
Yes.
They've had these experiences. They're able to share them. And I think that there's something quite powerful and moving in like that kind of empathy and that kind of understanding. I think that those films are able to capture them, especially like Tokyo Godfathers, because it's quite snarky in its comedy almost as well.
Oh yeah.
But it's warmth, and it's the warmth of it being a Christmas movie and all those kind of things. Like it's and also like the warmth of perseverance, I'd say.
Yes. Let's talk about Tokyo Godfathers, which is by far the most grounded in reality for Satoshi Kon, obviously, but it's also, I think probably, this one even more so than Millenium Actress, most sentimental, has more warmth. Again, an unsettling warmth It's never like buy the book, old Satoshi Kon.
Absolutely.
No, never getting that. It's always something a little bit strange. But do you want to have a little crack through Tokyo Go? I'm throwing to you all these. You're a film guy.
Let
I
me
love the way you
try.
explain them. I can do it as well if you
I will
wish.
tell you this: do not throw for me for Paprika. I won't be able to explain what that's exactly about.
None of
I
us
don't
can.
think anyone can.
I don't think he could.
But Tokyo Godfathers, it's a story about three, like vagabonds, homeless, displaced people living in Tokyo. And it is as Christmas is coming about. And it's like about their, their daily survivals and all that kind of stuff, like the squabbling of it all. But then they find a lost baby, a lost child. So it's about them trying to look after this child and hopefully reconnecting this child with people. It's actually really interesting because now I'm thinking about Satoshi Kon as a film fan, and I think that in Japanese cinema, there's like these foolish characters that are kind of like usually, often they can be a background character or something. Like a really easy example of what I'm talking about is in The Hidden Fortress, the Akira Kurosawa film.
Yes.
It's almost like the two point of view characters or lead characters of that are the fools. And you see like this great epic story around them. But like they're your point of view and they're like funny, silly characters. But it's like a quite serious story that they're part of.
Yes.
And I've never even thought about these two together like that. But yeah, there's something about this where you're seeing like these foolish, silly characters in a rather meaningful story, but you get a lot of the heartfelt from experiencing a day in their shoes.
Yeah. It is a really, and also the fact that it features a trans character as one of the three main characters, not a small thing.
2003, wasn't it?
2003.
Absolutely. And
it's a hell of a progressive thing to be doing. And it's interesting because there's three different characters, all from, there's a young sort of runaway teenager. There is the mid to late 20s, early 30s. I'm not exactly sure the age. It's sort of ambiguous of the trans woman character. And then a middle-aged man. And they're, again, it's the whole idea of chosen family. It's also a real examination in how close things can be in life to being a disaster and being a roaring success, or just how close to the edge we all are at all times, and how one wrong turn can take you right off course, which is a real thing with homelessness and something that's probably not talked about enough. And really humanizing a trans character in 2003, anytime, really well, is so brilliant with this film. And chosen family, such a nakama, such an important thing across all forms of storytelling, but this movie does that beautifully. And the fact that they're trying to find the mother of the lost baby, or is it lost, has it been abandoned, that's the question. We won't spoil that, but I just think this film does something really interesting, and it is very moving. It's funny, and also Christmas, not a big thing in Japan, but it is kind of made with an idea to the West as well. I think just because he's obviously using Christmas films aren't a thing in Japan, really, but clearly Christmas films, massive thing in the West. So another way that the influence has gone back and forth with Satoshi Kon as well, which I think is why he's so interesting, because he makes very distinctly Japanese films, but with an eye to the West, and why I think it's such a shame we lost him.
I think it must be like that Western influence of him being like a cinephile and watching your Terry Gilliam's American movies as well. And I think, it must be like that informs his worldview or informs his artistic sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's not my favorite of the four films, I'm not going to lie, but I still really, really like it. I think it's an excellent film.
For years, I thought it was something entirely different. I'm pretty certain if you go back and listen to our episode, we're talking about Perfect Blue. I'm pretty certain I was like, it's the one about gangsters. I was like, it's a mafia movie. And I was like, what? Like, just, is it like 3 Men and a Baby, but Japan style? Cool.
Yeah, 100%.
Here for it.
Any other thoughts on that, or should we move on to the crazy?
Just this one is very different from the others, I would say. It definitely stands as a completely separate kind of, the other ones sort of have a similar dream. Well, it still has a dreamlike kind of sense to it, but not quite so literally. So,
I like the word grounding for it, because this is the film that reality doesn't bend so much in this, but he still uses the same techniques of filmmaking and storytelling that he uses in his other films, but in a way to create a more a representation of a realistic world.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
is the same kind of cutting and editing style that we were talking about. It is that same kind of shot selection. It is like focused first person perspective when he does these. He uses these elements to create kind of tensions and stuff. But it's a sweet story. It's a sweet film.
It is.
It feels like more heroic than some of his other films
Very
and
much.
stuff. But it's like, this one is such a joyful, easy watch. And, it's a Christmas film. It's one you could easily watch every single year.
Absolutely.
It could be in that rotation that you always do.
100%.
Put it in there with Die Hard.
Absolutely.
Throw it in,
Gone
that's
list.
it.
For me, it's Catch Me If You Can. It's
Yes.
this. It's Muppets Christmas Carol.
Best.
It's like, that's what I go for. Those ones.
100%.
I got Nightmare Before Christmas because you can watch it from Halloween through.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
have any
true.
opportunity
The
to do
perfect
it.
November movie.
Absolutely. Exactly.
We should probably talk about Paranoia Agent a little bit. We spoke about it on this podcast sort of recently in our underrated. I brought it in as my most underrated anime TV series, which I still think that it is.
Can I say, on Letterboxd, I have the second highest entry for Paranoia Agent. The second
Really?
highest entry. It is at almost 600 likes.
Oh.
And all it is one sentence. This is my Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of describe it. I really love this. This is
Yeah.
kind of my re-entry point into Satoshi Kon. My friends Tom Walker and Demi Lardner, the comedians, I was over at their house. They go, "Oh, we've been watching this thing. We think you'll like it. Do you want to watch the first episode with us?" And I was like, oh my God. I was so invested almost immediately. I was so swamped up in it. Like, I think while I was watching it, I bought the DVD because I was
wow.
like, I have to watch this. And I have to own it. I can't just like have a little file. I can't watch it on YouTube or something. I've seen it, I think, 2 or 3 times through.
Oh, wow.
And it's one of those things I'm like, I should always just go back to it because it's how was to describe it? It's fucking whack, man.
It's so whack.
Like, it's such a whack
It's so
concept, whack plotting, and then the way it all evolves throughout each other. Just watch that first episode and you'll be in. I
Yeah.
think it's got a great hook to it all.
I love
It's
it.
got a great mystery, and the way that it evolves is so weird. It's hard to even say if it's satisfying or not.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so great. I just think it's so fantastic. The music is cool. Everything's cool about it. I wish that there was HD version out there.
Oh, is there
someone
not?
should upscale it. AI, get AI to do it, whatever it
Get AI to
is.
do something helpful. you
Yeah,
know, like-
that's what it should be.
No, Paranoia Agent, yeah, I spoke about it in the underrated episode, but essentially a story where many different characters around town are being attacked by
Little Slugger.
Lil Slugger or Shonen Bat, depending on if you're doing the dub or the sub.
Yeah, so I watched the dub. I'll let it be known.
But yeah, so it's essentially this young lad on roller skates with a bent golden baseball bat, seemingly randomly attacking random people at some of their darkest hours and various times in their lives where they are just, but of course the question is it real? Is it fiction? Does he exist? Is it a madness of the many? How paranoia seeps into a society, how fear can take hold. It is so fucking cool and so artistic. I know that's a broad sort of lazy term, but it is just something that is so different. And like, obviously, we watch a lot of anime. There's a lot of very different storytelling styles and tropes to Western storytelling, of course. But this one is different even amongst anime. It's like, it's so weird. But in a great way, because there's bad weird, and there's good weird. Satoshi Kon's good weird, by the
Yeah,
way. Just
absolutely.
FYI.
If you didn't pick it up yet.
I remember when I was going through IMDb ratings last night, someone wrote this review about like Paprika, just quickly. He was like, after watching the appalling David Lynchian attempting Perfect Blue, I was like, what?
boy.
Just like, ignore.
Man, that's from Perfect Blue predates Mulholland Drive,
Yeah.
which I would say is its closest comparison because Mulholland Drive, let me double check I'm not speaking out of turn. Yeah, 2001.
Yes.
So it predates it.
Yeah.
So if anything, he's Connian.
Yes.
Lynch is Connian.
Exactly. Yeah, no, huge fan of Paranoia Agent. It's only 12 episodes. It's, it's just like a little seasonal.
300 minutes, guys.
That's it.
You can experiment experiment with 300 minutes
You
of your
can do
life?
it. You can do it. It's so. You haven't watched it, have you?
No, so I will. You guys might have convinced me. I don't know if you're
Yes,
I don't know if you're enthusiastic enough about it. So I'll see how we go.
I will lend you the Blu-ray if you need it. It will be my pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, sold.
Yeah, because it
No,
is
not
something.
sold. You only borrow.
sorry.
Only borrow.
Sorry, borrow.
Yeah, make that clear. But it is one of those things because it is super underrated. Because even amongst anime fans, it's super underwatched, and like those who watch it love it. I mean, so, and also
Do you think it's
not for
because it's
everyone.
not ongoing because it's a mini series?
Yeah.
To me, that's so much more attractive.
Agreed.
Because it's like, wow, I can't imagine, watching 10,000 hours of something now.
Yeah, it just wouldn't work. But it's like a miniseries, and it's so well done. Yeah, Paranoia Agent, check it out. It's absolutely incredible. Very Conian. We're gonna put that in. We're gonna make this a thing. But let's finish
Netflix,
up.
let's do a live action version,
That would be
please.
pretty fascinating. Huh?
No, I can't even imagine
Actually,
it.
no,
Unless they get Darren Aronofsky.
Guillermo, they can do it together.
Dan will come out with something really similar and be like, I've never seen Paranoia
I made
Agent.
this
What's
up.
that?
It's a girl on roller skates.
Okay, it's different. It's a golf club.
Let's move into his final film, which I actually rewatched last night. I've been rewatching all of these, but this one, fresh as they come. And this is, of course, Paprika. Paprika is more dreamlike and literally deals with literal dreams than any of the others. Inception owes a lot to this film, and to be fair to Christopher Nolan, he has gone on record and said huge influence, obviously, to anyone who's watched it. But Charlie, do you want to have a lash at trying to tell this one? Because I don't want to, because it's so confusing. But
Yeah, I think I'm the only person that understood completely.
Yeah.
Oh, you got
and
it.
Yeah.
You're all over it.
Well, since my failed attempt in high school where I decided I hated it because I didn't understand it, I have since, evolved as a person, and I still didn't understand a lot of it. But
No,
I think this is a general, I'll give a vague, synopsis of what I can gather, and then we'll talk about what our interpretations of it was. There's just so many moving parts, and actually I do have a criticism about this film about narrative, which we'll get into later. But the basic premise is Paprika is set in the future, obviously. There is a new device, it's called HD Mini. I can't remember calling it Apple Mini, which is a computer.
Again, he's a visionary, man.
He predicted Apple. HD Mini, which is a device which you can hook up to yourself and someone else, and when you can go into a dream and you can share your dream. Paprika is a psychiatrist, and Paprika is actually the psychiatrist, alter ego who can enter these dreams.
It's like the Avatar almost.
Yeah. So that's Paprika. Basically, cutting to the chase, the company which Paprika works for, I've forgotten the actual character's name. I just call it Paprika. Same. They're the same.
They're one and the same.
This company they work for, they've got some prototypes of this. It's still kind of only being used amongst certain people because it could be quite a dangerous device. It has been stolen, and one of their main scientists who work on it is missing, and they assume that it's him that has stolen it, and he's trying to kind of enter people's dreams. Basically, the device is being used badly, and people are starting to have waking dreams where they believe that they're in a certain kind of world, and it's up to Paprika to try and get to the bottom of this and stop it. That is the vaguest synopsis of this movie, but I think that is kind of
That's
the
pretty
general.
solid.
Actually, fantastic.
Yeah, that was
Thank
well
you
done.
so
yeah.
much.
Yeah, you did well.
I'm very impressed.
There you go. That was it. And that's all the movie has to say. Meanwhile, so another whole narrative that's happening here that we have to bring up is that one of Paprika's clients, who she is doing therapy to, is a cop who is investigating homicide and also investigating some of these deaths that have occurred because of daytime dreaming. And we follow him. He's kind of like is this even a word, or did we just pretend it was deuteragonist? Did we make this up, or is that actually
I'm pretty sure deuteragonist is a
word?
term.
Yeah, because I tried to Google it once and I was like, I don't know if podcasters just made it up.
Maybe I just read it on YouTube one time. It's
What
like,
is
that's
it?
a real term.
I don't know
Deuteragonist.
this term. Deuteragonist.
Having
Just
dual
two-
protagonists.
du-
Yeah.
dual-
Wow, okay, I like it.
I don't actually think
Look,
it's a word.
if it isn't
We've
a
said
word,
it with so much
it is
conviction
now.
many times.
I've been like deuteragonist. I mean, my friend Gerald has been on the show. He's a professional writer. He's like, I've never heard that term in my life, and I was like, it's a thing, dude.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm using it.
Yes,
Heard
let's
it
bring it in.
here
Let's get it
first.
happening. Game of Anime, you heard it here
We
first.
did it. So you have this kind of dual protagonist sort of. I mean, I wouldn't even say.
Don't wuss out on it. Go
Sorry,
for it.
deuteragonist.
Thank you. I feel electric every time I hear the words.
Yeah, so we follow those two, and there's a lot of characters, a lot of people with a lot of dreamlike. This the animation in this film is quite astounding. It's probably one of the
Incredible.
best feats of animation, I think, in cinema history. Those parades, those dreamlike sequences with that overwhelming kind of sense of it. Every little, there's a parade that's full of essentially like little creatures and toys and that kind of thing. Similar to Akira, actually. There is you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
But in this way, there's just kind of every little thing is animated to be entirely different. It just would have taken so much time, and it looks so wonderful.
And he used very little CGI.
Yeah.
He was all about hand drawn.
Oh my God. That guy's a lunatic.
So the reason that we're kind of bringing out Christopher Nolan and Inception, which owes a lot to this, is that a lot of the detective storyline and the imagery that's used in his dreams is very much in Inception.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are so many things. There's like the elevator leading. There's the woman that's in his dreams. There is like the hallway scene with someone getting shot. There is so many. The
Shattering
breaking of the glass,
Shattering glass.
which might be my favorite
Amazing
thing.
Yeah.
That's so cool. The visuals in this are just astounding, and they really just like, you know, while I'd say like Perfect Blue, we have got dreamlike sequences, but it's mostly kind of, you know, her catching her reflection, talking to her in the mirror, that kind of thing. This is like full on giant mechas. Like it just is larger than life, and it's probably his most ambitious in terms of animation and scale. One thing, my criticism about this movie is I think there's too many beats in this movie and it's a bit too long. That being said, it's still like I give it a 4.5 on my letterboxd, which I don't think I have a single vote, so not up there with the Paranoia Agent.
I like it.
Thank
You got
you
one
so
coming
much.
your way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's my kind of. I still think it's really a freaking awesome movie, and it's some of the again love letters cinema. We have one of the detectives' dreams, like showcasing different genres, that kind of thing, and honestly,
Wanted to be a filmmaker, and
it's really great. Anyway, that's
Films are dreams.
Yes.
I'll say that. Films are dreams.
They are.
I think it's very interesting the kind of comparison between this and Inception, because they're very different filmmakers.
Yes.
Christopher Nolan is someone that tries to ground fantastical elements in a reality. Like you look at his take on Batman, it's like heat, it's real, you know? He's like everything is as grounded as he deems it to be, as realistic and as real world as he deems them to be. And Inception, I think it's almost like a pragmatist's take on surrealism.
Yeah.
I like Inception. I like it more now, having revisited it for the first time a couple of years ago, revisiting it for the first time since it came out, really. And then going back to Paprika after, you're just like this. The difference is someone trying to ground surrealistic images, presenting them to you in an understandable way, which is Inception. Paprika is the freedom of dream logic, where things don't have to necessarily apply to any kind of physical realm or any kind of genuine logic, but it's like the dream logic. And I think it captures dream logic in a really effective way.
That's true.
Where you kind of are doing a little bit of that Slaughterhouse 5 thing of slipping through different things, looking at things in a different way, things being revealed to you in a different way, and the kind of lack of sense that those make. But when you're invested in it and when you're experiencing it through the film, you slip into it the way that a dream does. We go, well, of course that happens. Well, of course this happens this way. And like begins in a circus, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like showing you what it's going to be is like you're in a fantasy. You're about to experience a fantasy the way that you were when you were a child and you had an open mind to what the world could be like. And that's the only way you can experience them now is through dreams. It's a very successful interpretation of dreams and how they feel.
And it's because you're right, the randomness and the like sort of massive changes of like I'm here now, I'm there, and then I'm there, and I'm here, and like I think it's his most imaginative film by a long way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just like talking about the cutting that he does and the way that he changes, like the way that they transition things in that film, where it's like she's running, she jumps into a painting, she is that painting, and then that painting's your new perspective, follows you into that
So
painting,
cool.
and then she's a mermaid, and then she's flying, and now she's Tinkerbell, and now she's Monkey Magic, and it's just like what's going on? It's
Just loves
wow.
a good chase scene, doesn't he?
Loves a good
and honestly,
chase
I'm here
scene.
for it. But yeah, you're right. Nolan is kind of the opposite of that in many ways in terms of filmmaking, because he makes things gritty and real.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that he is inspired by that. But
It's
just
really
flips it
interesting
on its head.
because even if you go like Paprika is so colorful and so vibrant, and Inception, it's not like it's not those things. Like it's still a really good looking movie. It's still beautiful. The imagery is sensational, but it's so interesting that like Paprika is almost like the influence on plot, story, but not feeling and not visual, not the artistic, the aesthetic of the film. The aesthetic is more in line with like, you know, pragmatic surrealists like Escher and stuff, rather than even Dali or anything. Like he's like, yeah, my surrealism, it's like Escher, like they have all the staircases the way Escher does, where it's like architectural.
Yes.
And then maybe a little bit like, you know, Buñuel with like Unchen Andalou, where it's like, you know, that short film. It's kind of like taking a few of those things. But yeah, it's so interesting because it's like these films have a really strong relationship to each other. But it's like not everything. Not everything. It's just kind of like a little bit of plot, a little bit of detail, a little bit of story, maybe a little bit of character. But like otherwise, they're really very different versions of the same kind of thing.
And you're right with the color, especially the color scheme. Like Inception's very muted, very sort of dark, bleak-ish kind of like coloring. Whereas Paprika is literally like an assault, a full-on assault of your senses. But yeah, they are very different films. But of course, heavily influenced by
I guess,
one or the other, but the worlds that they go into too, like Nolan's worlds aren't very imaginative. It's like it's a snow world and it's a hotel world.
It's
and
just different James Bond levels or something.
Literally.
I guess because they're meant to be dream architects, so they're kind of curated. That's sort of the point. It's not actually like they're trying to emulate a dream, and whereas Paprika's like we're entering someone's like full dream, like so it's kind of madness.
It's. And that circus scene is so, when the clown gets out of the car, the opening scene, you just sit there and you go, oh, that looks so cool.
And then then he gets chased and everyone's him.
Everyone's him. That is, oh man, you could go through this, analyze every single bit of every dream so you can just be like, whoa, man, there's so much in here. But yeah, it's like.
And then he has to shoot himself.
Spoilers.
Again, because he and his storyline is that he like wanted to be a filmmaker, and then
his friend was far ahead of him.
Yeah, who passed away and he feels bad that he
didn't finish the film. He's like, why didn't you finish the film?
Yeah,
he's at one point it's like, I hate film. I got no interest in film.
But yet his dreams are all film.
Yeah,
yep. We love film, so Satoshi Kon. That's the moral of that story. But yeah, it's about like I don't know. There's something about having to like defeat your ego of yourself as well, and like to be brave. Like there's something about that kind of carried through all of them, where I was like, I hadn't really ever thought about that in these films, but I don't know, there might be something there.
I've got a quote I used last time when I spoke about Satoshi Kon, but I want to do Dean Dubois, who made Lilo and Stitch, How to Train Your Dragon, did a Sigur Rós documentary, Hamer, and also made Mulan. But he said, Satoshi Kon used the hand-drawn medium to explore social stigmas and the human psyche, casting a light on our complexities in ways that might have failed in live action. Much of it was gritty, intense, and at times even nightmarish. Kon didn't shy away from mature subject matter or live action sensibilities in his work, and his films will always occupy a fascinating medium between cartoons and the world as we know it. And there's another quote which I saw from Satoshi Kon where he was like, I'm not going to make live action films because if I ever did, my cuts would be too fast for people to follow. And so, which makes perfect sense, whereas that's why he can do the crazy cutting that he does and make it. I mean, still sometimes you can't follow it. Like in Paprika, you're like, what the fuck's going on? But I just think he is such an extraordinary filmmaker, and it's really sad because he was making a film called Dreaming Machine. That was his next film that he was making, which he I think 600 of the 1,500 frames have been key animated, and Maruyama from Mappa vowed to finish it.
Wow. He
was like, this will be finished. But he has then tried to bring in other people to finish it. I think he even worked with Hosoda, who made Summer Wars and various films. And he was like, well, look, basically he's now come to the conclusion where it's like, this is no longer, bringing someone in to finish this means it's like half a Satoshi Kon film, half this other person's film. It's never going to be what it should have been.
Yeah.
Therefore, what I think we should do, this is the latest thing I heard from Maruyama, where he's like, he wants to just strip it back to the concept and just give it to someone fresh. Wow. Ignore the 600 animated frames.
If someone would do a documentary about it and just about kind of what the film's idea was meant to be and everything. Yeah.
So yeah, it's sad. He was in the middle of making it, and like I say, but got that pancreatic cancer diagnosis, dead in 3 months.
Horrible.
Yeah, so I can't even imagine what he would have done. I actually do think that maybe he wouldn't have. I don't think it would have been live action, but I think he would have revolutionized mediums. I think that he could not be bound by what we see animation to be now. I feel like, perhaps I would have loved to see what he would do mediums that we don't even think about anymore, like virtual realities, those immersive experience, like those I would love to have seen what he did that. Would love to see what he'd done with like video games, if he could have done something there, or even, it's so old news now, but he was making films at the right time where I would have loved to see what he would have done with like 3D technology, like how to interpret that, because I do really like 2D animation films that get turned into 3D. I remember seeing The Lion King in 3D, and I just thought that looked really... It was very interesting the way that the mind kind of perceived something that was set up 2D to then look three-dimensional, but without becoming... changing its form or changing its shape. So I really would have liked to... I think he was an explorer. I think he was someone that would have been exploring these new ways, these new technologies, these new aesthetics, new ways to experience what he does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we lost one of the great visionaries of the medium.
Absolutely. One of the prophets.
Yeah. Could have done anything and was already doing, we're still so lucky we got what we got. Alexei, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. This was we started talking about this towards the end of last year. I was like, I can't wait. Because it's someone who I really immensely respect, and I really want to explore it. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for allowing me the chance to watch all these movies again.
Mate, we honestly, thank you so much to share your knowledge and your passion. It's been a joy and a pleasure. So thank you, my man.
I'm so glad we got the Australian film guy on.
Yeah,
That's
the
it.
film guy.
Incredible.
Soon to be world.
Next up. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you are liking what we're doing, you can find us at our website, gatewaytoanime.com. You can also hit us up on our socials, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, which hopefully you are watching this on. If you really like what we're doing, you can find us on Patreon as well. As little as $1.50, we do special episodes every Friday, behind the scenes footage, and early releases of the episodes. So honestly, if you want to help us out there, every little bit helps, makes a big difference. So thank you so much. We'll catch you all next time. Alexei, fantastic. Charlie, always a pleasure. We'll catch you next time. All the best.